Namaste, everyone. Thank you all for joining our 8th and final webinar, part of our Northeast Hindu Yuva Hinduism in the 21st Century webinar series. My name is Tanmay Varipati, and I am the co-coordinator for this series and a rising junior at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. I am also the vice president of UMass Hindu Yuva. Hindu Yuva is a student-run, nonprofit sociocultural organization with a presence in over 35 universities and cities in the United States. Our aim is to practice, promote, and preserve our Hindu identity while growing up in the United States. Before I begin introducing our final topic and moderator for this evening, I want to thank you all for watching last week's webinar about Hindu storytelling with Amish Ji. We had nearly 1,000 viewers in the past 7 days. Throughout tonight's event, viewers watching live on YouTube and Facebook are welcome to comment on questions they have about our topic, and we'll be choosing unique questions for our moderator to ask our speaker. Without further ado, our topic for tonight is Our Sacred Bhumi, a Hindu view on environmentalism, which will be moderated by Natasha Patel. Natasha is currently a rising senior at Wesleyan University, pursuing a double major in physics and the College of Letters. Natasha is originally from Dallas, Texas, and has worked on many projects for both Northeast and Southwest Hindu Yuva. She's interested in reanalyzing and practical applications for our dharmic traditions and learning how to better implement these values. Thank you, Natasha.
Thank you, Tanmay, and namaste, everyone. I'm so delighted to be moderating today, and perhaps even more delighted to be able to introduce Gopalji Patel. Gopalji is the co-chair of the UN Multifaith Advisory Council, and is since 2010 has been the director of the Bhumi Project, which is a joint initiative of the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies and GreenFaith. The project has worked on greening mandirs, conducting workshops to train young Hindus on environmentally sustainable practices, and they're often the leading voice on offering perspectives on environmental concerns from a Hindu perspective. In 2015, they also issued the Hindu Declaration on Climate Change, which was endorsed by over 60 Hindu organizations and leaders globally. In a couple of months, the Bhumi Project will be coming to an end so that this initiative can be expanded in the form of Bhumi based in New York. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Gopalji. Namaste.
Namaste, Natasha.
So I guess I'll just get right to it. I'd like to begin by asking you about your journey. What drew you to environmental activism, and why did you decide to take this Hindu approach in particular?
Sure, yeah, it's a great question to start with, and thank you to you and all the organizers for having me on this evening. So it's actually quite interesting, and I think when we look back on our lives, sometimes we can see the hand of God directing us in a certain direction, and I think certainly for me that's the case when it comes to working on issues surrounding the environment and sustainability, because if I'm honest, I wasn't looking for a career in environmental issues. I was actually training to be a brahmachari. I'm part of ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And I was living in an ISKCON ashram in India and then in London. And I did that for about 2 years. I did my master's, I had my undergraduate degree under my belt. And I was living in an ashram as a brahmachari. And then I realized that that life wasn't for me, that I couldn't sleep on the floor every day. I couldn't wear robes. I couldn't eat simple food. I needed a few more luxuries than the brahmachari life affords. And so I approached a friend of mine who was and still is the founder director of the Oxford Center for Hindu Studies, which is an academic institution at the University of Oxford. And I asked him, I've got a master's degree, I've got an undergraduate degree in computer science, I've lived a life as a brahmachari, what should I do? And he just said, well, we're starting a new program on Hinduism and the environment. We're getting some funding from the United Nations Development Program. Would you like to just do it for 6 months and as an intern and kind of see how it goes from there? And I was like, sure, why not? To work with something connected to the UN and Oxford University sounded very prestigious. And so I started that in 2009. And here we are 10 plus years later, I'm still doing the same work, and I've been doing it full time now for about 6-7 years. And it's really been a journey. Initially, I did it because I thought it was interesting. I wanted to see how Hinduism could be applied to mainstream contemporary concerns. And as I've been on the journey over the last 10 years, I've seen just with my own eyes the impact that climate change and environmental issues have to people all over the world. And I've just been convinced that this is probably the most pressing issue that we as Hindus, as individuals, as concerned citizens, as students can address, because it's something that's going to affect every single person, every single form of life on the planet. So it's really been a journey of discovery and understanding for me to really dedicate my life to this work of caring for the earth, Mother Bhumi, and to work on issues of climate change and environmental sustainability.
That's really interesting. So it, sort of began with this dedication to the dharmic tradition and then looking into the applications of that. So can you tell us a little bit more about the sort of work that the Bhumi Project has done? And also considering that it's, I think, one of the first Hindu faith-based projects, did you face any pushbacks? Were there challenges?
Sure, yeah. So, the work we've done is very vast and broad. Like I said, we've been around for 10 years and we've worked internationally. The countries we've worked in and do continue to work in are mainly India, the United Kingdom, and North America. Previously, we did a little bit of work in East Africa. So for example, some of the work we did, in India, we started off working with not all, but a lot of the most major prominent temples in the north of the country. So we worked in towns such as Rishikesh and Haridwar and Puri and Dwarka and Vrindavan, Mathura, Ujjain, Shirdi. And we launched a program called the Green Pilgrimage Network, which aimed to make Hindu pilgrim towns environmentally friendly. And we coined a phrase, just as we have corporate social responsibility, we coined a phrase called temple social responsibility, that temples and temple towns have a responsibility to their local ecology and environment to ensure that that the temples are a net asset, a positive influence on the local environment. So we did a lot of work around temples. We produced, which I still think is true, we produced the first ever guidebook for Hindu temples and the environment. It's called the Green Temples Guide. We consulted over 30 temples across India for that guidebook, which was launched in 2014. That's one thing we did. We also, for a number of years, we organized a campaign called Hindu Environment Week, which was a week of environmental action every third week of February. And that's a funny story because we thought we'd do Hindu Environment Day because, a day is good. And then when we consulted some Hindu leaders, they said, nothing in Hinduism lasts a day. Like our weddings last for 2 weeks and, this festival lasts for 5 weeks. So you have to have Hindu Environment Week. A day is not enough to celebrate the earth. So we had something called Hindu Environment Week, which we celebrated right across India over a 3-year period. We mobilized about 30 to 40,000 people across the country, mainly in these pilgrimage towns, which I mentioned, but also in Chennai and Mumbai and Kolkata and so on. So that was something. And then you mentioned the Hindu Declaration on Climate Change in 2015 in the lead up to the Paris climate negotiations. That was an international effort. We consulted with Hindu leaders globally in the drafting of that statement. And then it was the first time that we got so many Hindu leaders to endorse a single statement on a single issue. Over 60 leaders right across the world all wholeheartedly put their name behind it, which was really amazing. So we've done a lot of work around education, mobilizing people. We've done work around the Kumbh Mela. We were at the Kumbh Mela in Allahabad in 2012, 2013, I believe. We were at the Kumbh Mela in Nasik. We had a Green Kumbh campaign where we were promoting solar energy. We had Hindu gurus promoting solar energy at the Kumbh Mela in Nasik, which was really far out and amazing. We've done international trainings for Hindu youth in places like Rome, and here in New Orleans, we've convened gatherings where Hindus have come together to talk about climate change issues. And we've also, what we do is called thought leadership, which is that we engage at the United Nations level. So you mentioned that we co-chair the UN's Multifaith Advisory Council. And what we do at the UN is really put forward a Hindu perspective on issues of climate change and sustainability. And that's something that we're increasingly leaning into because we see that a Hindu voice is desperately needed at that level to show that there's a worldview that Hindus have, which can contribute to the issues of our time. So there's a lot more, but that's broadly speaking, a lot of the work that we've been doing over the last 10 years or so.
It's really fantastic. And I'd really like to follow up on this idea of, rethinking, reanalyzing Hindu practices and, maintaining this integrity of being environmentally sustainable. But before we go into that conversation, I'd also like to touch on what you sort of said at the end there about offering this Hindu perspective. So I'd like if you could, speak on whether there's something fundamentally unique about this Hindu approach, this Hindu perspective, and if there is, how does that contribute to, how the world right now is thinking about environmental sustainability? How does that, manifest in our tradition?
Sure. Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle. And that was where we started out, was like, what is a Hindu contribution to addressing these issues, right? Because we come from an ancient civilization with texts and rishis that have been teaching, teaching these things for thousands of years, right? So like, what is our contribution to modernity? What is our contribution to climate change and sustainability? So that was our starting point. And, we've done a lot of research, we've published work on that. And I would say what we found is that it's not so much unique, but it's a perspective that I think is shared by a lot of indigenous people across the world, but is oftentimes drowned out by Western Judeo-Christian narratives around, the meaning of life and what development means. And so what I found is that when I'm in a room with Native American people or indigenous peoples from South America, there's a lot of, there's a great connection, because we speak in a language that they often speak in, and so, but at the same time, I think there are also certain unique perspectives and contributions we can make as well. One thing I think is very profound, and it's one of the basics of Hinduism, I think, is just the fact that the earth is a goddess, that we call the earth Bhumi, that she is a mother. Like, there are 7 mothers considered in Hinduism, and the earth is one of those 7 mothers. And I think that's just a beautiful starting point, that if the earth is a mother, if the earth is a goddess, then we should treat her with the same love and respect and care that we treat our own mothers, and how we treat the other mothers in Hinduism, such as the cow is considered a mother, and the nurse is considered a mother, and the wife of the guru is considered a mother. So all these beautiful mothers that we have, the earth is also one of our mothers. She gives us so much day in, day out, without asking for anything in return. So I think that's a beautiful contribution. And also an understanding of that there's an inherent order or balance in creation. And that's really one of the first ideas in Hinduism. If you go back to the Rig Veda, one of the first texts, there's this concept called Rita, R-T-A. And Rita means that there's universal order and a universal balance in the universe. And so what that means is that concept that everything is uniquely balanced is so strong. And if you couple that with the teaching of Dharma, Dharma means to uphold and to sustain. If you put those two powerful concepts together, what you have is that Dharma in its essence means to uphold and sustain the natural order and the natural balance of the universe. And that right there is the essence of how we should be caring for the environment and sustainability. And then there's so many other things such as ahimsa. We talk about nonviolence, but what does that really mean? And if we look at the current climate crisis, the current climate crisis is really a result of himsa, of us causing harm to the planet, of fossil fuel extraction, of over-exploitation, of overconsumption, right? We are harming the earth, and therefore we are harming ourselves. And ahimsa says that we should minimize as much as possible the harm we cause on other people and to the planet itself. So these are just like very basic understandings of Hinduism, right? And then there's other stories that you can bring out. So for example, if you look at the life of Lord Ram, or if you look at the life of Lord Krishna, they lived agrarian lifestyles. They lived in the forests. They lived not in cities. Krishna lived, for part of his life in Vrindavan, Mathura, and only when he was an adult, he moved to Dwarka. But when he lived, and what's the most famous stories of Krishna? It's when he's a cowherd boy looking after the cows, lifting up the Govardhan hill. When you look at the life of Lord Ram, the 14 years in the forest, so many beautiful stories there about how he cared for the natural world. And when he went to fight Ravan, he gave everyone an equal opportunity to be part of his army, from Hanuman, who lifted mountains, to the small spider who just was carrying a very, very small thing. But he gave equal opportunity to everyone because he saw everybody had a contribution. And so from the text, from the Sanskrit text to the Ramayana and the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, there is a depth, there is a wealth of information there. And these understandings are not different to sustainability. Sustainability, when we talk about it, is really a non-religious way about how to live in the world. Sustainability is asking that we treat everybody nicely, we give everybody opportunity, we don't hurt other people. They're really basic universal things that Hinduism has advocated for thousands of years, and a lot of world traditions have advocated for thousands of years. So in our work, we don't see a dichotomy or separation. It's just a different of language and emphasis that we're really seeing when we look at a Hindu perspective and look at a really secular sustainability development narrative. That's what we see.
Yeah, it was really beautiful the way you described these values that we have, and a lot of us, myself included, we really give a lot of importance to these values and our traditions, and look to rediscover them, to study them further, and to apply them. And a huge part of that is carrying forward traditions, rituals. And I think what a lot of us are seeing today is a kind of contradiction between the way our practices have evolved to maybe not be so in line with this dedication to being environmentally sustainable. So if it whether it's food wastage when it comes to pujas, or pollution, or even if we're working towards plant-based consumption, continue using dairy products in pujas, things like that. So how do we reconcile these two approaches and decide what to do?
Yeah. My understanding is that Hinduism is a dynamic living religion. It's not static. It's not dogmatic. It's relevant and applicable in all scenarios in all parts of the world. And it's one reason why it's survived for thousands of years. And it's one reason why so many people, Hindus and non-Hindus, draw inspiration from Hindu teachings, is because they are so broad-minded. They are so liberal. Everyone can find their place. Everybody can find a practice in Hinduism. You want to worship Lord Ram, you can worship Lord Ram. You want to worship Shiva, you can worship Shiva. You want to worship Durga, worship Durga. You want to be a Naga Baba living in the Himalayas, go ahead and do it. There's something there for everyone, right? And that's because of the broad-minded liberal nature of Hinduism. And so I think to your question and to this point is that, the rituals and the pujas and, the yagyas and all those things that, are part of the richness of a Hindu practice, come out of a certain time and place, right? So for example, we used coconuts because coconuts were readily available in India. We used rice because rice was readily available. We used banana leaves because banana leaves were readily available, right? But we live here in North America, like we live in the United States, or we live in Canada, or we live in another part of the world. And those items of worship, which we used maybe if we were living in Gujarat or Tamil Nadu or West Bengal, aren't readily available. I live here in New York City. I don't know where I can find the local coconut tree or the local banana tree. I don't know, they don't grow here in New York, right? So I think part of our work as the next generation of Hindu leaders is to a certain extent firstly, it's to understand the intent behind these rituals and pujas, right? Like I said, it's not dogmatic. We don't do it just because we're told. We do it because there's meaning and it has a tangible benefit to our life and to the planet, right? So first we have to understand what the intent and the purpose is behind these practices that we do, right? And then we have to understand why certain things were used in these worship ceremonies, and crucially, how we can localize them to our own context, right? So if I'm living in New York City, if I'm living in San Francisco, if I'm in Dallas or Detroit or Chicago, what are the gifts of Mother Earth in my locality that I can use in the worship, right? Because those elements are being taken from the earth and given back to the earth, right? In the sacred fire, right? So what is growing in Chicago? What are the local crops? What are the local grains that are growing in that state or that region of the United States that I can use in worship, right? That I really believe is at the heart of how we can, as I say, indigenize our practices, right? Not to fly things over from India or our flowers come from another part of the world and the rice comes from another part of the world. Let's see what grows right here and now. And I think we'll find renewed meaning in those rituals and those practices. And I'll give you an example. We worked with the Livermore Temple in the San Francisco Bay Area, one of the largest Hindu temples there, I think the first. And we worked with them to do a full South Indian meal that was 100% vegan. Right? So they, everything, in South Indian cuisine, there's a lot of yogurt and ghee and so on. And they did everything from coconut oil and things like that. And they made it plant-based and nobody complained and nobody noticed the difference, right? So there are things that we can do. It's just, the point is, how much do we want to really emphasize the respect and the worship of Mother Earth? How much of that is central to our understanding of what a Hindu is? Because if we make it central to our understanding, we will naturally reorientate our lives and our practices that honor and respect the earth rather than exploit or harm her, which like you're saying, oftentimes our festivals do when it comes to firecrackers or food waste or using milk, which is from cows, which are treated really badly. The earth is not happy if we use things which are harming her, right? She is happiest when we offer things with love, which have come from a wholesome, healthy place. And so I think that's part of the work of our generation, to really kind of re-examine and reimagine these festivals for our current time and context.
Yeah, I think you brought up a really brilliant point there about, understanding what the essence of traditions and practices are, and then learning to shift the practice itself according to the context in which that essence, that value is being applied. So kind of going off of the same question, I feel like there's sometimes this contradiction between, our decisions to change our individual practice or to change industry. Because on the one hand, we can sort of, I can decide to make certain decisions because I don't agree with the way industry is impacting the environment. And I can invest time and money into changing the way that I do things. On the other hand, I can, invest time and money and resources, or we can, as a community, to change industry itself so that we don't have to change our practice. So between, these two routes generally, which one do you think is, more beneficial in the future?
Yeah, it's like, and that's part of the challenge right now. The crisis is so overwhelming that we want to make sure that the contribution we make is meaningful and it's going to have some kind of impact, right? Because we don't want to waste our activism time and free time in doing something which doesn't lead to any kind of tangible result, right? So, sorry, there's a police car going out behind my window, so I apologize that that's coming through. It's that's New York City. I think it's, I think I compare it to Hinduism, in that in Hinduism, like I said earlier, everybody has a place and everybody has a contribution. And it's really the intent rather than the act itself, which is what God kind of recognizes and appreciates, right? And so like that story of Lord Ram, the little spider was carrying a little grain of sand and Hanuman was carrying the mountain, and Lord Ram recognized and appreciated both of them, right? He didn't think one was higher or lower because everyone's doing something according to their capacity, according to their nature, in essence, according to their dharma, right? So I think it's for everyone to decide and discern what their nature is. What do they feel comfortable doing, right? There's this understanding in Hinduism that we have to kind of go outside of our comfort zone a little bit to kind of grow as a person. If we're always in our comfort zone, we'll never grow, we'll never make progress, right? And Hinduism is a progressive path towards enlightenment, to moksha. It's a progressive path to being a better person, to love God more, to be a better person to other people. And that requires going outside of our comfort zone. And so what can we do that will go put us outside of our comfort zone to make a tangible, to make a dent in the work, right? And so for some people, if they're business minded or financially minded, they may want to start a business which promotes green agriculture or green technology, or they may want to buy shares in a company and do stakeholder advocacy, which is like you buy a share in like an oil company, so you can attend the shareholder meeting and then you can ask the oil company to change their policies, right? That's like shareholder activism. That's a very common thing. But you may be like, you know what? Burn down the whole system. I'm going to go on the streets and I'm going to protest and I'm going to say down with capitalism and down with fossil fuels. And like, that's the only way, right? And that's good. And that's right if that individual feels compelled to make a difference in that way. But not everyone can do that, right? Because if everyone's out on the street, who's developing the policies, who's building the green economy, who's ensuring there are jobs for people as we shift away from a fossil fuel-based economy, right? So there's no silver bullet to address the environmental sustainability crisis, right? It requires everyone to make a contribution. And that contribution has to be based on who we are as an individual and what our nature is. Some people are activists, some people are financial people, some people are writers and actors and poets, and there's a place for that as well. Some people love to dance, So I think it's really for everyone, first to, if they think this issue is serious, that caring for Mother Earth is a serious issue, and we're kind of at a tipping point when it comes to caring for the Earth, then let's really kind of do some meditation. Let's kind of really go deep within ourselves, however we do that, and think about how can I make a contribution? And it doesn't need to be big, but it needs to start somewhere, and it needs to push us out of our comfort zone a little bit. And there we'll get a reciprocation from God, from the earth, to make us feel, okay, this is the right path, I need to continue. So I think there's no one single answer other than everybody needs to do something, and everybody needs to work out for themselves what that something is. And that's a lesson from Hinduism that we apply to the environmental movement. Hinduism doesn't say for everyone to do the same thing, right? Hinduism says, like, what's your level of intellect? What's your level of consciousness? What do you like? What don't you like? Oh, okay, so you like worshipping in this kind of way, or you like going to places of pilgrimage in this parts of India? Okay, so there's a religious practice for you to do that, right? And same in the environmental movement. What are your needs, interests, and concerns? And then find a way to contribute to that. So I think that's how we find out what it is that we're supposed to do. I want to go out on the streets protesting with you, Natasha.
Delighted, honored, actually. So every person, kind of based on their own abilities, their interests, have a role to play. Yeah. And I like how you use the example from the Ramayana, from that I understand the story in a completely different light now. This is kind of a iffy question. A lot of us, we consider the US our Karma Bhumi and India our Punya Bhumi. And I've noticed that a lot of times when it comes to, environmental activism or thinking about Hindu practices, people are quick to think about, Ganga and pollution in India, and, oh, this is going wrong in India and that needs to be fixed in India. And earlier we sort of talked about, shifting our practice according to our location, our context. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on, to what extent we should be focusing on India when it comes to, being passionate about environmental change, and how much of that maybe can be channeled into thinking about the place in which we live. How should we approach that?
Sure. Yeah, I think, again, I think that's for everyone to discern for themselves. Like, some people are really passionate about the environmental issues in India, and those issues are very stark and very scary. There are a number of major environmental crises that are hitting India in the very near future, in the next couple of decades, which is going to cause widespread death and chaos. There's no other way around it. So people are passionate about that. They want to help address that issue. They should. Other people are very passionate about what's going on in the Amazon, right? That under the current administration in Brazil, the Amazon is being deforested at a rate that's never been seen before. And just a bit of context, the reason the Amazon is being deforested is for cattle and for soy, for beef production. So people complain about the Amazon being chopped down. It's being chopped down for beef. That's the only reason. So people who may be passionate about protecting cows and protecting the Amazon, they may want to go to the Amazon and be on the front lines working with indigenous groups to protect the Amazon, right? That's my personal approach is, I'm interested in where I'm living, because I feel that's where I can make the most impact, right? Because we all have a circle of influence, a circle of impact. And I was born and raised in the UK. We didn't say that, but I'm sure from my accent, you've noticed that I'm not from New York City, but I'm actually from London, England. So I grew up in England, and I'm now living here. So I feel it's my responsibility to do work here in the United States, because this is where I'm living, this is where I'm paying my taxes. And I'm passionate about the work in India, but I'm not living there. I don't know what the reality is on the ground, but I know people there, and I can help support them. I can connect them with the work we're doing. I can connect them with other activists in India. I can connect them with the United Nations and other people across the world. So I can support them. But for me, I'm focused on what can I do here in the United States. And for those of us living in the US, and if there's people listening in from Canada or, and so on, we don't need to look far to see the environmental problems here in the United States, right? Just a few examples. The water pollution in Flint, Michigan, right? Still, as far as I know, still has not been resolved, right? The issues in Standing Rock, where that company wanted to put a pipeline through a sacred land. These are indigenous people who have lived here for centuries, who have much in common with Hindu understandings of the earth and spirituality. And, companies and the government are really trying to discredit and disregard their spirituality for the benefit of oil and money, right? So spiritual indigenous communities here are natural allies for Hindus to work with. It's a no-brainer. You speak to them, it's like they speak the same language as us. So let's go and protect indigenous lands across America, which currently are under threat with the current administration, right? Or let's look at, there was an article in the New York Times just this past weekend, I think, where it showed that African-American communities are 75 times more likely to live in an area where there is waste, where there is a waste incineration plant, right? That's just crazy. If you're Black in America, you're 75 times more likely to live near a waste incineration plant. Now, that's not by accident, that's by choice, that's by design, that's city planning, that's government policy, right? So you don't need to look far to recognize there's a range of environmental issues here in the United States, animal rights, air pollution, you know, that we can address right here and now, and which we can have a tangible impact in. But if we're interested in India, if we're interested in Africa, other parts of the world, if we love penguins and polar bears and we want to go to the North Pole and the South Pole, do it. The point is, do something, right? We all have a contribution to make. Our hearts all yearn for something. So let's find what that yearning is and let's see what we can do to kind of pacify the heart to create the world that we all want to live in.
Right. So again, like every individual can, you know, choose how it is that they want to improve the world around them, to contribute to this movement, to this effort. Mm-hmm. So kind of going off of this, the common misconception really seems to be that only rich people can afford to actually be environmentally sustainable, to buy products that are sustainable. And kind of the flip side of the same thing is that, you know, there's being sustainable ends up being kind of a trend. Like it's in fashion, it's something, you know, we do something like one day that's going to help the environment, and then that's it. It's like an event. It's right. It's fashionable. Mm-hmm. So how can we, you know, begin to shift our mindset to actually normalize sustainable behavior?
Yeah, it's a good question. We have to be careful because what do they call it? Click activism, where we think if we like a post or share something on Facebook or whatever social media platform we're using, we think that that's helping a cause and we feel good. It's definitely better than not sharing the post, but it's definitely not, there's definitely more we can do. So we have to be careful that we don't fall into that pattern. And we also have to be aware that, you know, there's something called greenwashing, where companies tell you they're being environmentally friendly or they're sustainable, but really you scratch behind the surface and you realize like actually they're just not, you know, and like that's a common thing that's happening now in many companies. And so I think it's like I said, it's something we can all do, but I want to come back to this point. It's like, if we, like, for example, if we believe God is real, right? Which in Hinduism, we do. We believe there is Ishvara, Bhagavan. We believe there's a supreme deity, whether it's Rama or Krishna or Brahma, or whatever we want to call him or her. If we believe there's a supreme deity, a God, that fundamentally changes how we live our life, right? Because you understand that there's something higher and bigger than me at play here. And I'm just a small person or a small thing in a greater reality. And there's this other reality in existence, right? And, you know, and the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavad Purana and all these texts talk about that other higher reality. And so in the same way, if we believe there is this supreme deity, whatever we may want to call him or her, in the same way, if we believe the earth is a goddess and she's a mother, then if we really believe that, we will do all we can to care for her and not harm her, right? And so like most of us have mothers, most of us have grandmothers. And, you know, if they get sick, we will do anything to care for our mothers, right? If it means, you know, spending a lot of money to get the medicines they need, or even if it's something like going to the local store to get some mangoes, if she really wants a mango, you know, if we love someone, we will go out of our way to serve them. Like that's the meaning of love, that we put their needs ahead of ours. And so I think if we really internalize and meditate on this understanding that the earth is a goddess, it will no longer be a conscious decision. It will be a natural, unconscious decision that, of course, I'm going to do this because it's the right thing for the earth. If it means I have to buy my clothes from an ethical supplier, or if it means I have to buy organic produce free from pesticides, or if it means that I have to get an electric car, which may cost more money up front, but will save me money in the long term. If it means I have to get solar panels on my temple or my home, I'll do these things because it's a natural product of wanting to serve the earth, right? And so, but that's difficult to start with. It's hard to kind of immediately internalize that understanding. And so let's start with simple things we can consciously make a decision about, so like, where are we buying our clothes from? There are now plenty of ethical clothes suppliers in the world which don't depend on essentially slave labor, right? So let's find those clothes suppliers we can use. Food, where is our food coming from? Is it local? Is it organic? Is it pesticide free? Can we buy from a farmer's market? These are very basic, easy things we can do, right? And as we start doing those things, it will be easier to kind of expand that circle of action to encompass other things which may be a bit more expensive or difficult, like going solar, like, not flying around the country for vacations and things like that. Those decisions become easier once we start doing the small things and really meditate and internalize this practice and this prayer that the earth is a mother. Well, there's a hymn in the Atharva Veda called the Bhumi Project. It's 63 verses in praise of the earth. And one of the prayers is, the earth is my mother and I am her child, right? And if we just meditate on that constantly, we will naturally start living in a way that really exemplifies that. So I think that's how we can do. Let's start small. Let's do something what we can control. And like I said, let's get out of our comfort zone a little bit. And we'll be surprised how much progress and how much impact we can have by doing and living like that.
Yeah, especially the point on traveling and flying around the country on vacation and decisions that I feel like I would never stop and think about, Bhumi Mata, rather, like that would just not even occur to me in that moment. And so this is a really important point of, how can we keep that, that thought, that feeling, that devotion at the front of our minds when we make all of these decisions every day.
Yeah. If I can come in just on the flying piece, because there's been research done around that. And I know and we actually did a campaign a couple of years ago about trying to encourage Hindus in the United States not to travel so much, because, a lot of us like to go to India for weddings and yatra and, and seeing family. And there's been research that shows that if someone takes a return flight from New York to Los Angeles, right, that return flight, the amount of carbon that an individual emits on that flight, on those two flights, is the same that the average Brazilian emits in 1 year, right? So just one round trip from New York to LA, which I'm sure many of us have done many times and will do in our lives, is the same carbon that the average Brazilian emits in 1 year, right? So that just shows you how carbon heavy that kind of travel is. And there's also research that shows that, again, the carbon that's emitted on that flight, how much that carbon will contribute to the death of people in the future. People have done those calculations as well. So because we know with carbon dioxide, rising global temperatures, that's going to cause the death of people in the future. And now calculations are done. Like, if you do this journey, it's going to emit this much carbon, which is going to result in this many people dying in the future, right? So like, if you calculate it like that, and Indians and Hindus are very good at math, right? So I'm sure a lot of us are probably engineers on this call or doctors. If we calculate it and look at it like that, it brings it into stark reality that the choices I make right now are going to have an impact in the future, which will cause the suffering of others. And if I want to lead a non-violent lifestyle, if I'm a Hindu, I'm trying to do, then I should really consider, should I be making this journey? Should I be making this decision? Because I know it's going to cause suffering in the future, right? So that's something for all of us to kind of digest and kind of really I know it's difficult because we all like traveling, right? We all love traveling, but these are the decisions. Hinduism is not, it's easy to practice, but it confronts us with very stark decisions we have to make about our lives, and especially in the context of climate change. And I think that's the responsibility of all of us to kind of engage with those hard decisions if we really want to live out the values which we claim as sacred.
Yeah, wow. The stats on that are just, and as you were saying that, it occurred to me kind of how wonderful and useful it is to really see the earth as Bhumi Mata, because on the one hand, our actions and our choices can be motivated by this terrible, dark, looming, oh, this is going to cause so much suffering, and oh, there's so much death, and it's this huge, it seems like we're all doomed. And our choices can sort of be motivated by that, oh, I don't want this to happen. Yeah. that's really, I think, emotionally taxing. And on the other hand, we can sort of come to the same decisions and the same choices out of this, this approach of love and devotion towards the land. And
Yeah.
I just thought that was really beautiful, how you can have that same outcome without constantly having to think about how terrible things are.
Yeah. And I actually wrote a chapter in a book about this actually, which is around how do you deal with what they call climate grief or climate depression? Because it's a real thing. Like as you're speaking, I'm sure many other people on the call are resonating with you that like, if you do the research, it's a little bit overwhelming, right? I mean, if you read the stats, if you look at like the decline in animal populations globally, if you look at the increase in global temperatures by the end of this century and what that's going to mean, it's overwhelming. And there's no doubt about that, right? But we all have to make some kind of contribution. So I actually wrote a chapter in a book about this, which I can share with you later. And I looked into what the academic research says about this. And I have a triple S, a 3S, a triple S model for dealing with climate grief. Can I share it with you?
Please.
Okay. So the first one is sadhana, a spiritual practice. We all need to have a spiritual practice that connects us to the earth, right? Because climate change is so overwhelming that we feel like we're displaced or we're going to be displaced, right? So to have a practice which is regular and connects you to the earth. And it could be something as simple as watering a plant in your home every day, if you have tulsi, which many Hindu homes do, or if you have japamala, they're even made out of a rudraksh or tulsi, just chanting on your prayer beads, you're connecting with the earth, right? So have a sadhana, a spiritual practice that connects you with the earth, right? The next one is satsang. Have community around you. Again, because this is such an overwhelming issue that we feel like we may lose our family in other parts of the world, or we're not sure what's going to happen to us. Climate refugees is a real thing. Even here in the United States, people are moving because they know where they're living right now in a couple of decades is not going to be livable due to climate change, right? So there are climate refugees in the United States itself. So satsang, be surrounded with a supportive, loving community that understand these concerns as you, right? That really helps us. So sadhana, satsang. And the last one, which we've been talking about quite a lot, is seva. Do some seva, do some service. Even if it's a little thing, making a small contribution is so empowering that it can help us get over the fear and the overwhelmingness of what do I do? Just do something, plant a tree, work with a local environmental organization, go vegan, whatever it is, but do something. So these are the three things. Sadhana, satsang, and seva are like the 3 S's for environmental action, but to also help us deal with the grief that we may be feeling when we look at to just how overwhelming this issue is.
Yeah, that's awesome. Won't forget the 3 S's. It's a very useful tool. So I want to take this opportunity to just remind everyone that you can submit questions through the YouTube Live and through Facebook. And I'll be asking a question from some of our viewers right now. I'm clubbing a couple together because it's sort of around the same topic. Something that's on a lot of our minds, veganism, vegetarianism, how can we explain that to our friends, encourage people to sort of take that on. And at the same time, there's this question of, how should we think about meat consumption kind of historically when it wasn't, this terrible industry? Is that something, how do we think about that side by side with, the push for vegetarianism and the push for veganism today?
There's a few questions and I kind of want to make sure I hit all of them. So I heard the last question was around how to understand the meat production industry. Is that right? Or
yeah, I mean, there's sort of this nuance around, the ethics behind meat consumption. Mm-hmm. And that's something that, comes up a lot in conversations regarding Hinduism and vegetarianism and veganism. And how should we think about that? Has that changed based on how the industry is? Is there, something fundamentally wrong about consuming meat? How should we?
Sure. Yeah. It's where to start. Where to start. It's a big issue. Well, one thing is that the livestock industry, the meat industry, is the biggest carbon emitter in the world, right? Because you look at all the resources that go into raising animals, the water, the grains, the transportation of the animals, the slaughter of the animals, the transportation to the supermarket, from the supermarket to your home, and the cooking, and the eating, and then, if you look at the full life cycle of meat production and consumption in the world, in aggregate, it's the largest single biggest contributor to climate change, right, as an industry, right? And so it's huge and it has to be addressed. And what you're getting at is like, what's a Hindu approach, or how should we as Hindus engage with that issue, right? Now I grew up eating meat, I did. And I stopped when I was about 17, 18, and I haven't consciously eaten meat since then. But it's hard because meat is in animal products are in a lot of products, right? You want to eat that candy, it's got gelatin in it. You want to eat that thing, it's got fish oil in it. It's like, so it's hard, but I don't think I haven't consciously eaten meat since I was 17, 18. Again, going back to the earlier point of the broad-mindedness of Hindu sages and rishis, there was accommodation for people to eat meat in traditional Hindu societies in India. Like if you look at the Kshatriyas, the warriors, they were allowed to eat meat because they were warriors. If you look at Lord Ram, like, isn't there a story where he kills a deer? I think, there's accommodation, there's allowance for people to either kill animals or to eat animals. But like in everything within Hinduism, everything is done in moderation, and there are guidelines for how to do it and how not to do it. So for example, I don't know where this is from, so I can't tell you the source, but someone told me that in some Hindu practices, it was the norm that, if you wanted to kill an animal, you would have to catch it, and then you'd whisper into the ear of the animal, I am going to kill you in this life, and in the next life, you can kill me, right? So you have that understanding that like, this is a bad thing, but in order to satisfy my desire for flesh, I'm going to kill you, with the understanding that in the next life, you're going to come back around and kill me, right? So there was accommodation within guidelines, right? What we have now, and even people in the West say this, is that we've gone to an extreme, that animal killing, even by Western standards, is off the charts compared to 50, 60, 70 years ago. Like you speak to like a lot of Christians and Jewish people here in the United States, they'll tell you like their grandfathers and grandparents probably ate meat maybe once a week, once every couple of weeks, once a month at that. Now it's like 3 times a day, right? And more, right? So we've gone in the Western world and in other parts of the world now from like doing things in moderation, understanding there are limits that have to be placed on activities, to you can do this exponentially and there are no repercussions, right? Well, guess what? There are repercussions, and we're living in the repercussions right now. This pandemic is a result of an unhealthy relationship between nature and people, right? The pandemic is due to the exploitation of animals, right? And this pandemic is just the first of many future pandemics we're going to have from zoonotic diseases. Zoonotic diseases that come from the animal kingdom that come over to the human kingdom. Ebola, SARS, MERS, all these things that we've had in the last few years are all a result of human encroachment on natural species, on wildlife, right? In England, when I was growing up, there was an issue of mad cow disease. Maybe here in the US, I don't know if people have heard of that, but mad cow disease, what they were doing, there were sheep that were diseased, right? This is a bit gross, but I'm going to tell the story. There were sheep that were diseased, and what the farmers were doing were taking the brains of those sheep and feeding the brains to cows. And then the cows would eat the sheep's brains and digest the disease and get sick. And so, yeah, that's where mad cow disease came from. And then people would eat the cows, and then the people would get sick, right? So like, how twisted is that like you feed brains to another animal, which is gross enough, and then the animal gets sick, and then you eat that sick animal, then people get sick and die, right? So we have to like bring it way back into moderation. And really, I don't want to say plant-based diets are the future, but they're definitely a huge part of the future. I think there are always going to be people who want to eat meat. I think that's just a fact of life. I don't think we can ever legislate against the eating of animals. I think that's always going to be the case. But like, as the Hindu rishis and sages had that foresight thousands of years ago, okay, if you want to do something which is not good for yourself or for society, do it, but do it in a controlled way that doesn't lead to further destruction and chaos, right? So I think as Hindus, as we engage in this issue, we have to understand that meat eating within certain restrictions is okay according to Hindu values, right? Because in Hindu societies, like, people used to eat meat. But we're not Kshatriyas. I'm not one of the Pandavas, like, I haven't met like a Kshatriya ever in my life, so why do I need to eat meat? I'm from a poor Gujarati family in Gujarat. My family were farmers, so, I don't need meat to subside. Most people don't. So let's make the shift, if we haven't already, to reducing our meat consumption or eliminating as much as possible, and then trying to go the extra mile, which is to trying to cut out dairy products. Because again, if we believe cows are sacred, which I think most Hindus would agree to that, the way cows are treated in milk production factories now is just absolutely horrendous. A cow can lead, if it leads a natural life, can live for about 23, 25 years. Most cows now only live for about 3 to 4 years. In those 3 to 4 years, they are artificially inseminated a number of times. They give birth to 2 or 3 calves. By the time they've given birth to their 3rd or 4th calf, the cow can no longer stand up, is no longer healthy, so they have to kill the cow. And each time it gives birth, the calf is taken away immediately, so the cow keeps producing milk. So modern milk production, if we're using this milk to offer to the Shivaling, if we're using this milk to offer to Krishna, do we think Shiva and Krishna are happy to drink milk from cows that are treated in such horrendous ways? There's no way that Krishna would want to drink that milk. There's no way Lord Shiva would want to receive that milk in worship. So that's why we have to really, going back to the earlier point, re-examine our rituals and our practices and see, are they in line with what's going on in the world today, right? Because milk production, nobody can claim that current milk production is in line with Hindu values, in the West. And so we need to and that's a hard one, because we all like paneer, we all like kheer, we all like all those lovely milk products. But that's something that I think we have to confront if we want to be true to our values, right? If we want to have integrity. And it's not like we do it overnight, but we make conscious, slow decisions. Like for now, like I only eat vegan ice cream. And there are some great vegan ice creams now. Oatly, I know I shouldn't advocate for certain product, but Oatly ice cream is the best. Like I can't taste the difference. Right, so there are alternative products we can use. Vegan yogurts now are just as good as dairy-based yogurts. So there are slowly things that we can do when it comes to the milk stuff. But like I said earlier, these aren't easy choices, but being a Hindu means making hard choices if we want to grow as a person and have that spiritual development, which Hinduism says is our God-given right and responsibility to develop that inner strength, that inner spiritual wisdom. So yeah, no more paneer. You look so sad. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's been a tough one for me. I've been thinking about it for a while. My friends are encouraging me to go vegan, but I've grown up, drinking milk, and yeah, that's been a big thing on my mind. And hearing you talk about it has, added to that. I might just have to go vegan starting tomorrow. So earlier you talked about how in our decisions we can sort of hold back from, traveling so much, thinking about the things we consume, how much we buy, and then just now you were talking about, everything in moderation. And that, made me think about how this, minimalism as a concept has been, growing in popularity, as well as, discussion around the fashion industry, wearing clothes, that have been like wearing used clothes, hand-me-downs, trying to, encourage a system of just reusing cloth instead of buying new clothes. And I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Yeah, so, that the whole minimalism thing is great. That takes me back to my life when I was living in the ashram. It was a very minimalist lifestyle. I had one locker, I had a sleeping mat and I used to sleep on the floor, and it was a great life. So I'm a huge advocate for minimalism. It's such a hard word to say, and it's sometimes even harder to practice. but I think it's less about the minimalism and more about doing things with the right consciousness, right? Because we can be minimalistic, but if we're egotistic in the process, we can be a right jerk, right? And that's not a nice person to be, and that's not something we want to create in the world, is people with huge egos because they're claiming to be very minimalistic. So it's more about the consciousness and the intent. And going back to the earlier points, if the consciousness is there, we'll make those choices to be minimal. So like we'll repurpose. I'm sure there are many saris that your mom has in her wardrobes, piled up. You can make bags out of those saris. You can make curtains out of those saris. You can do so many wonderful things. Just don't use your mom's old wedding sari. I don't think she'd be happy if you repurpose that for, a pair of pants or something. But, there are things we can do, that we can repurpose old clothes. We can buy from thrift stores. We can give to charity and so on like that. These aren't radical or kind of out of the box things. Like these are like very much in the mainstream now, like people are doing this. And, I sometimes meet old Hindu uncles when I tell them like I'm doing work on the environment and stuff, and like, oh, Hinduism's always been advocating for recycling and this and that, and it's true. Essentially what you're getting at is the circular economy, which is like nothing has gone to waste, like everything is reused, is repurposed. And I'm sure if we spoke to our parents, and definitely our grandparents and great grandparents, if we can, like India was a circular economy, like nothing went to waste in India. People always repurpose things, because they saw everything as, this is another fundamental point that Hinduism has, that everything is connected to God. Everything is coming from God, right? And so to waste something that is given to us by God is, I wouldn't say it's a sin, but it's not a nice thing to do to God, to throw away something that he's giving to us or she's giving to us. And so the idea that everything should be repurposed, reused, recycled is an old Hindu idea. It's an old indigenous idea. All old cultures, wisdom traditions had this understanding that everything should be repurposed. It's only with the introduction of plastics, it's only with electronic items with planned obsolescence, it's only with those things, and a capitalist consumerist society and culture where you always have to buy the latest and greatest thing, that like that understanding has gone, right? And you see how much governments are worried now that we've stopped buying things because of the pandemic, right? It's like, what do we need to do? Oh, let's open all the stores so people can go back out and be consumers again to get the economy going, like that's their concern, that we're not shopping, right? And so it's a crazy way to build a society, that a society functions on the ability of individuals to buy stuff they essentially don't need, right? And so, yeah, let's go back to this circular way of thinking, understanding everything is coming from God, and we'll naturally, like you said, upscale, downscale, recycle, and be happy about that. I've never made my own clothes. I don't know if I ever will, but I'd like to try at some point. I'm sure we'd all like to try that, and I'm sure our mothers and our grandmothers and fathers, would be more than happy to show us how to do certain those things. So it's an old, as they say, it's as old as the sun. There are no new ideas, right? Everything has been done before. It's just a case of relearning those things that, like my grandparents did in the village, about 100 years ago.
Yeah, this is sort of, made me think also about what makes us happy. There's definitely been a shift in, like what is a standard, what's appropriate to give as a gift. Right. This like urge to buy something new, and like what we're delighted by it. There's this culture of, getting something new, something costly is so much more popular now versus like, oh, like I gave my friend a little flower, or, a little thing that I, just sewed a little design on. That shift has totally happened. And I think it's so important for us to sort of, reflect on that and come back to this idea of what really should, make us happy.
Yeah.
So we're nearing the end of our session here.
Oh, already?
I know. So I have one final question. It's a big one. An imaginative one.
Okay.
If you could, how would you reimagine modernity, an ideal implementation of sustainable industry, transportation, food consumption, etc., according to this Hindu approach? So what would like an ideal version of today look like, given all the technological advancements that have happened, since our great grandparents were alive? Having all of this new stuff, how can we shift things and like be as imaginative as you can? And also, just to kind of add on to this already, I'd be interested in hearing about how Bhumi Global, what kind of work Bhumi Global will be doing in service of this reimagination.
Yeah. Okay, two good questions. I think, like I said, it's not about anything, there's nothing new under the sun. I think everything has been done before and tried before and succeeded before and failed as well. And I kind of think what needs to happen, and I think what's happening, and which is going to result in the reorientation of human society, is that, and I think the pandemic is speeding up this, is that, and which is the heart of Hinduism, which is like one of the founding kind of questions of Hinduism, which is, what's the purpose of life, right? What's the purpose of life? It's like a very simple question, but the answer is very profound. At the moment, modern Western developed nations, and increasingly most of the world now, the purpose of life is not a spiritual pursuit. The purpose of life is to make money, go to a good college, get married, have children, retire, look after your grandchildren, go on vacation once a year, and then die, right? There's no goal. There's no, this is what I'm working towards, right? It's always a series of little goals which don't lead to anything grand at the end. And I think what Hinduism offers, and indigenous traditions, wisdom traditions of the world offer, is a fundamentally different paradigm and a framing for what the purpose of human life is. My understanding of Hinduism, that Hinduism is there for spiritual liberation, that everything we do in life is for the goal of becoming an enlightened person, to develop. I'm a Krishna Bhakta, I'm in the Bhakti tradition. So for me, my goal is to develop a deep, loving relationship with Krishna and Radha, right? And that's what I'm trying, that's the essence of what I'm trying to achieve. And everything else I'm doing in my life is to facilitate that goal, right? And like, again, like I said, someone could be really wanting to be worshiping Lord Shiva or Durga or Saraswati, whoever it is. And Hinduism is structured in a way to facilitate that. Like you look at the different ashrams, right? You have the Brahmachari ashram, Grihastha ashram, Vanaprastha ashram, and Sannyas ashram. It's like a cycle. You kind of start with nothing as a Brahmachari, and then by the end, you're a sannyas, you have nothing again, right? Because you come into the world with nothing and you leave with nothing, right? But what are you carrying forward? You're carrying that character, that consciousness that gets you closer to God, right? And in the Western world, in a capitalist consumerist society, you're taught to always accumulate and never give up, right? And you're taught that, a successful person is someone who has, and I'm not saying this is unsuccessful, but you're taught that a successful person is someone who has a lot of money, has their family around them at the time of death and all this. But we know from the Hindu perspective, like none of that will go with us to our next life. None of that we can take with us, right? We come into the world with nothing, we leave with nothing. And so I think what's really needed, and this is where I think Hinduism can play a strong role in the reorientation of what is the purpose and the meaning of life, is to bring back the spiritual essence of life, the spiritual meaning of life. And that was there in traditional Hindu societies and in like indigenous communities and even other world religions as well. That's at the heart of all world religions, that the aim of religion, the aim of spirituality is to develop a closer, loving relationship with God, right? But what's happened, that's been superseded by capitalism and the pursuit of money, the pursuit of fame, the pursuit of prestige, right? So I think we need to change that. And I think if we put spiritual pursuit into the center of our life, we can do business in a better way. We can do government in a better way. We can do education in a better way. All those other things will reorientate themselves if we reorientate ourselves. Right. So, for example, if I'm, if someone on the call is like really passionate about being an environmentalist, they will go to a college which has like a really good program on teaching environmental sciences, that has a really good environmental credibility, and the whole life will be reorientated around caring for the earth, right? If someone's really passionate about gender equality and making sure women have a voice in the world, they'll go to like a liberal arts school, which is only women, they'll be engaged in the women's rights movement, and their whole life will orientate around the upliftment of women across the world, which is so much needed, right? And so, but the heart of all of those is, I believe, the heart of Hinduism, which is a spiritual pursuit to be a better person, to be a spiritual person. And I think if we do that, all these other things will fall into place. They have to, because the spiritual energy, the Shakti of spirituality is so powerful, so overwhelming. Things can't help but fall into place if we really put that in the focus in the middle of our lives, right? So I think I can talk about policy, and we do work on policy, and now I can transition into what Bhumi Global is going to be doing. One thing we're doing is we're doing work around Hinduism and finance, right? So we were asked about 3 years ago now by the UN to develop Hindu investment principles and guidelines, right? And the UN asked Muslim groups and Jewish groups and Christian groups. So we developed Hindu investment guidelines. They're available online. And now what we're going to do is take those principles and try to mainstream them for Hindu society and Hindu businesses and temples and institutions. So it's going to be work that we do over about 2 to 4 years, maybe longer. But essentially, we want to be in a place where if you're a Hindu, and maybe most of us are students, so we don't have a lot of money, but when we do get some money and we want to invest, we want to be able to show, if you're a Hindu, this is where you can invest your money, which is aligned to your values and your principles. You'll get a monetary return, but you'll also get a social return, right? Because we'll only be asking people to invest in projects that address climate change or address gender inequality or address, childhood education or things like that, right? So, because we see in other traditions, like in the Jewish world, in the Christian world, in the Muslim world, there's understandings of finance, right? Sharia finance and Christian finance and Jewish finance. We have some kind of a sense of what Hindu finance is, but I don't know where to invest my money if I'm a Hindu, right? If I'm a business, I don't know what kind of businesses I should and shouldn't be doing if I'm a Hindu, right? So that's something very tangible we're going to be working on over the coming years. We're going to be, we're in the very early stages of thinking of doing a global survey of Hindu understandings on climate change and sustainability. No one really knows how serious Hindus across the world take the issue of climate change and environmental sustainability. So we really want to do a global survey to get a sense, how much do Hindus actually care about this issue, right? And how can we serve them? How can we support them in being strong environmental advocates? So those are just two of the things around Hinduism and finance, around understanding how we can better serve. There's much more. If people go to our website, bhumiglobal.org, they can add their name to our mailing list. We're going to formally launch at the end of September, so we can we'll be in touch with our programs, and we'd love to work with Hindu Yuva groups across the US and Hindus across the world as well. But that's just a taste of what we're going to be doing over the coming years.
Thank you so much. This has been such an inspiring, enlightening discussion. It's definitely inspired a lot of reflection on my part, at least. So at this point, I'd like to ask you if you have any closing remarks or reflections on this webinar itself, how you felt about it, and what you want to leave our audience with.
Yeah, well, thank you again for the opportunity. It's been great to have this conversation with you, and I hope it's been helpful for your members. I would say that my closing remarks are, and it's what I've said in the talk, which is that we all have a contribution to make. We all come from a rich tradition of caring for the earth. Let's draw upon that. Let's see what contribution we can make, and let's raise our voices. And whether that's in the streets or in the boardroom or wherever it is, we all have a contribution to make, but let's put caring for the earth central to our lives. Mother Bhumi is calling out for this. She's crying for our help, and we have a responsibility to respond. And so let's all do that as much as we can with a spirit of joy and love, and in satsang, in association with other people. Let's increase our seva. Let's do what we can, and we'll be surprised at how much we can do, if we reorientate our lives in this way. So my prayers are with all of you, and if I can ever be of service in any way, personally or through my organization, we'd be more than happy to work with you in the future, individually or as collectively as well. So please consider me a friend and an ally in this work going forward.
Thank you so much. Sadhana, Satsang, and Seva. I'm definitely not going to forget that at all.
There you go.
One of the most brilliant takeaways from this.
Thank you so much, Gopalji, for sharing your insights on the Hindu view of our earth and how we can implement sustainable practices in our life. If you're interested in hearing more about Gopalji's work for the Bhumi Project and the Bhumi Global, please be sure to follow the organization's social media pages for updates on what they're doing and their activism. And thank you so much, Natasha, for moderating this wonderful discussion we needed to hear, especially in today's environment we're facing. As we conclude our high energy 8-week webinar series, I would like to thank all the 15,000 viewers who joined us in learning more about our Hindu culture and values these past 7 weeks. Tonight, I would also like to take some time to introduce our hardworking team who has worked so tirelessly to execute these unique webinars. I'd like to just introduce the members who could not join live first: Shayli Swadia, Kush Patel, Vaishnavi Patel, Sumit Khandewal, Arshjot Sharma, Chirag Patil, Suneet Patil, and now I would like to introduce all those who joined live today on our call. We're going to do a little gallery walk, and I'm going to introduce everyone present. They have worked so tirelessly this past 7 weeks, starting with Ajay Bandagonda, Heta Shah, Sahit Nagireddy, Radha Rayali, Krishna Shah, Srinidhi Raghav, Kushi Doshi, Manas Potnis, Ashima Sharma, Dhruv Shahane, Mansi Dinakar, Vidima Shetty, Sumit Khandewal, oh, he's here, Vishwajit Malampati, Avantika Raman, Soham Pant, and Janavi Ganesh. Thank you all so much for your efforts. These webinars would not have been possible without each and every one of your efforts and your dedication. Please be sure to follow our Northeast Hindiva pages on Instagram and Facebook, and please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can watch all our previous webinars. Thank you all for joining. Dhanyavad and namaste.